This is the Investor Connect podcast program. I'm Hall T. Martin. I'm the host of this show in which we interview angel investors, venture capital, family offices, private equity, and many other investors for early stage and growth companies. I hope you enjoy this episode. Well, hello, this is Hall Martin with Investor Connect. Today we're here with Arie Brish, founder and CEO of cxo360 and author of Lay an Egg and Make Chicken Soup. cxo360 is a leadership advisory firm with an unparalleled network and numerous measurable success stories. The main purpose of Lay an Egg and Make Chicken Soup is to introduce the multifaceted new products or services process to those executives who need a broader look at business innovation and how all the moving parts are supposed to work together. The people that will benefit the most from this book are founders of startups, CEOs, general managers, CFOs, venture capitalists, corporate directors, product managers, and new business owners. Arie, thank you for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Well, great. So what's been your background? What have you done before writing the book?
Writing the book is kind of a natural outcome. I grew up in high tech, 20-something years in corporate America. Later on in the past 15 years or so, well, I'm aging myself now. In the past 15 years, I've been more involved in startups. Some were in technology, some in clean tech. And over the years, as I advised so many companies, I became industry agnostic almost at this point of my career.
Great. So what inspired you to write this book at this time?
So when I started my career as a young engineer a million years ago, you have the mindset of, okay, I designed the best product and people will just buy it. But then you realize that there's many other details in the execution that needs to work together in sync with each other. Otherwise, no matter how good the product is, it's going to fail. So over the years, I see that more and more, even in corporate America, that's supposed to be, experienced in this kind of things, and definitely in the venture world where you have founders, first-time founders, and I coach and mentor in different capacities or different accelerators. I saw that people don't know what they don't know, right? It's not any fault of anybody, just you don't know what you don't know, right? So I started to write notes to myself first, blogging on LinkedIn and blogging in other capacities. And, after a year or two of blogging, I realized I have enough material that if I glue it all together, it will make a decent book. So that's what I did. Frankly, I didn't know it's going to be a book, or my family didn't know it's going to be a book until I was 2 months before publishing. In my mindset, at least, it was never a decision to write a book. It was more like, writing here and there. And at some point, it all came together and made sense to push a button and send it to be published.
So just tell us more about the book. How does it guide one in the process of innovation?
So most of the books in innovation focus on two things, either on how to make a good idea or how to raise money for your startup. In my experience, it's only the first step in a long journey. So my focus in the book, although I do talk about what makes a good idea and how to raise funding, but I would say 80% of the book is how to execute. So eventually you make money and your investors will make money on this journey. And in many cases, people succeed or fail based on the execution, not so much about the good idea was a good idea to start with. But then when it fails, in many cases, it's just because of bad execution or stumbling on speed bump you didn't expect, and you find yourself flipping over the speed bump.
So who is the primary audience for it? It seemed like it covers a lot of different people and topics, but who are you writing it for?
Yeah, so the structure of the book is 100,000 feet overview of everything you need to know as a CEO or a general manager in a business unit or an investor. There is one chapter per topic or one chapter per discipline. If you are, been CEO for 3 or 4 or 5 times, probably the book will not give you any news. Maybe it will structure everything you know from experience. So the best audience is first-time CEOs or first-time general managers of a business unit if you're in a corporate world, or first-time investors in the venture world. The other disciplines or the other people that it may make sense, if you want to be a team player, let's say you're a CFO of a company or marketing product manager, whatever, you'll be a better team player if you know what the other disciplines going through and make sure you'll be a good team player and everything will work together in sync instead of just focus on your little niche of the problem.
So when you wrote the book, what surprised you the most about the topic?
The thing that I wouldn't call it surprise, but as I wrote the book, let me step back, many of the venture books takes examples from recent startups and some of the books I read in preparation. By the time the book is published, the companies the book is talking about already failed in some cases. So the book becomes obsolete when it's published. So what's call it surprise, you can go 100 years back and take a case study, the invention of the light bulb or the invention of the telephone or things like that. And you see that from a generic business point of view, the same challenges and same obstacles existed 100 years ago. You can learn from, Thomas Edison or Alexander Graham Bell, things that they had to wrestle with that are relevant today, no matter what you do. If you do an app on a smartphone or I don't know, a new restaurant or a new food something, the business issues are in many cases the same or very similar. So you can learn, if you take an old enough startup, you see the journey they went, what obstacles they had through their journey and how did they overcome or didn't overcome, and you can learn from that. So I found out that many young people, they don't go back, they just look, okay, what was the startup du jour of 3 months ago that somehow started to make an appearance in the market. But when you look 10 years out or 20 years out or 50, the oldest case study I have in the book is 500 years old. And that's the invention of the printing machine. And there are lots of parallels between that and what the printing machine did for society back then versus what the internet did for society in recent years. There are lots of parallels you can draw. And so this is an extreme example of how an old example can be still applied for today's environment and lesson learned for today's environment.
So what was the most important takeaway you found in it about innovation?
One important thing I found, as doing all my research for the book, is that you can learn across industries. There are many cases where, you stumble into a challenge in a particular industry, but somebody else in a totally different industry had the same issue 20 years ago or 10 years ago. And you look at this case and you learn from their experience, even though it's totally different industry. But when you analyze the challenge from a generic business point of view, whether you may be a restaurant and the other one may be a hospital, you can still learn from each other and apply the lessons from somebody's success or somebody failure or lesson learned and apply it to your industry, even though it's a totally different industry.
Well, so how did the book change the way you think about innovation?
It just made me be more convinced that the success or failure is about execution. And, in many cases, young people, young entrepreneurs are very innovative because they are not boxed yet. If you work for 20 years or 50 years in the same discipline, you tend to have rigid box around yourself and you have hard time to get out of that box. Young people, their box is a little more flexible or maybe doesn't exist at all. So that's one thing that you learn from these examples is somebody out of the box. That's a cliche, but if you're very young and not boxed in somewhere, you tend to come up with solutions that nobody else in this particular industry came up with because they are too limited in their thinking.
So what is the biggest mistake you think startups make about innovation?
There are several topics or issues or challenges people need to look at and think about. One repeat thing I've seen in several startups is people spend too much time on fighting with each other about 0.5% here or there on the equity, how to split the equity between the founders. And they spend all the energy on that. And turns out they cause the company to spiral down. So whatever equity they manage to negotiate for themselves, if you multiply by 0, if the startup doesn't succeed, Doesn't matter if you have 20% equity or 50% equity, multiplied by zero, the result is zero. So I've seen many cases where people spend too much energy in whether they get 17% or 23%, and later on they cause the startup to fail because the CEO or the founders or the board of directors are spending too much energy on those issues. And by the way, one thing that the book has that I didn't even realize when I wrote it, one of my reviewers brought it to my attention, that almost every chapter talks about the human aspects of whatever the topic of the chapter is, whether it's a marketing or obviously organization in the company or even intellectual property. The examples I bring highlight the fact that the human relations of whatever you do is the most important part in any part of the business journey. So this is one. And then the others is, pay attention to all these details because if one component in this complex machine fails, the entire machine will collapse. It's like a domino thing. You have every little detail to work together, otherwise everything collapses.
When you talk about raising funding, how does this play into the fundraising process, and how does innovation play into the fundraising process?
So going back to your previous question and go back and we'll go back to the funding. So the other thing that is maybe important for the funding is something called learning curve. I teach here at the university, and we touched on learning curve a couple of days ago. Learning curve is a theory that works in practice, and the theory was developed over 100 years ago. You'll be surprised. Everybody learned it in school, and nobody does anything about it in the practical world. And why it's important for funding, because when you build the first 200 products or the first 1,000 units, the cost may be enormous. Okay, it costs you $100 to build a product that you sell for $25. And everybody is surprised, and panicking. How come you're losing money on these products? You have to budget for the learning curve, because learning curve exists and people know it exists. They read it in the textbook, but then when they come to real life, they never design for it. And it does impact the funding, because if you have to sell the first, X number of products losing money, it impacts the funding you need to raise, because you have to kind of subsidize it to some extent. Because even if it costs you $100 to build, if the market will pay only $25 for this product, you have to subsidize $75 for every unit you sell initially until you drive down the learning curve to make it profitable at $25. And people fail to take it into account in the budgeting plan. And then they come to that cliff that they lose money on selling the products initially.
And what mistake do you see investors make in this space? What would you coach them to do differently next time?
So putting my investor's hat now back, what I see investors don't pay enough attention is to the execution and to the people and team aspects. Okay, you can be the best product and you show a nice PowerPoint that why this market and the billion people going to buy that. But then founders I'm talking to, can they execute on this product, or do they have the right plan to execute? And then once, if they have the right plan, can they manage this execution? So this is one mistake that many investors make. They get captured by the enthusiasm of the inventors and not pay attention to the inventor's ability to execute. And it's different people. You can be the great inventor in the world, but then you cannot always execute. Well, one of the things that, when you research Thomas Edison's, the biggest or the most important contribution he had to technology and to innovation is he created a process where he can invent something, but then he had a team of people that were able to execute on R&D and take it out to the market. And it's never a one-person invention. Even Thomas Edison, he had a team of dozens of people that developed his idea. So he was brilliant in coming up with the idea. For example, a light bulb, that's like the ultimate invention, right? First of all, the person that invented the light bulb is not Thomas Edison. It was invented 50 years before him. Thomas Edison went through the process to be able to commercialize it, to be able to manufacture it, to make it reliable enough so you don't have to change a light bulb every 10 minutes. It will work for a few months at least in the beginning. So, and he did some thousands of experiments in finding the right formula that will make his invention commercially viable, or not his invention, to make the idea commercially viable.
So I guess that's a lesson to many entrepreneurs. It's not about inventing it, it's about taking it to market and making it useful.
Yeah, exactly.
So based on this experience, what would you consider writing next?
As I said, I'm not a professional writer, so I get my writing satisfaction, so to speak, by blogging. And, I blog a lot on LinkedIn. And LinkedIn, by the way, when they have this limit of 1,300 characters per piece that you blog. Mm-hmm. So it's pretty challenging to, get a message across in 1,300 characters. And the blog I did this week, was it yesterday or the day before? It was Dr. Seuss' birthday yesterday. Mm-hmm. And the way Dr. Seuss came up with The Cat in the Hat, somebody came up with a list of 250 words that young kids understand, okay? And they came to him and said, write a book that kids will find enthusiastic, but use it only with these 250 words. And that's how it took him 9 months to develop The Cat in the Hat, and he used only 236 words out of the list of 250. So it takes an effort to condense, an idea into a, limited number of words, and in the case of LinkedIn, limited number of characters. And whenever I do on LinkedIn, I start to write, and then I find myself, oh my God, it's 2,000 characters. Now, how do I condense it to 1,300 characters? So that's kind of the challenge, but I enjoy the process.
Right. Well, in the last few minutes that we have here, what else should we cover that we haven't?
Well, I think the important thing is look at older examples, no matter what your invention is, whether you're trying to make, stem cells or some medical artificial intelligence or whatever. When you launch into the market, the basic business challenges the same, whether you're trying to put a man on Mars or you're trying to do a virtual reality artificial intelligence of your dead grandmother or whatever it is. The challenges of commercializing it are very similar. So look back 100 years, find something similar with similar challenges, and look how they try to resolve those challenges and what made it work or where did they fail and what have you. The fact that you're using some super fancy high technology, but the business challenges are kind of the same.
Well, great. Well, how best for listeners to get back in touch with you?
Okay. One good way is LinkedIn. So I'm on LinkedIn, very visible, I think. So you can find me on LinkedIn and send me, a message, LinkedIn message. Or my website is, you mentioned cxo360.net. So there is a contact information there. These are the best two ways unless you want to write down the email, which is cxo360@hotmail.com. But LinkedIn is always a good, because you can, find me by the name and not by the email.
Great. And the book, Lay an Egg and Make Chicken Soup, is available now. Is it online?
It's available on Amazon since actually for 2 years now. It has been on and off bestseller on Amazon, up to number one in few occasions. Amazon track the sales of books by the hour, actually. So it was a number one several times. It was on a top 10 million times. So I did something right in commercializing this book.
Well, great. Well, congratulations for that. I want to thank you for joining us today and hope to have you back for a follow-up soon.
Thanks for having me.
Investor Connect helps investors interested in startup funding. In this podcast series, experienced investors share their experience and advice. You can learn more at investorconnect.org. Paul T. Martin is the director of Investor Connect, which is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the education of investors for early-stage funding. All opinions expressed by Hall and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of Investor Connect. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.